Cancer, type 1, diabetes, and titanium bolts in your leg, versus the death zone with no oxygen. Sounds like a guaranteed death sentence, right? For Boyan Petrov, this was just life. He became the first diabetic to summit the killer mountain, K2, but then vanished where no one expected it, on the lowly Shishapangma. His empty tent, its flap open to the wind, still holds one of the biggest Himalayan mysteries of 2018. How did a zoologist from Sofia get China and Nepal to break their own border rules for a rescue mission? And why did the mountains finally claim the man who seemed absolutely immortal? Picture a man who's equally at home in two completely opposite worlds, the damp darkness of deep caves and the blinding white summits where you can barely breathe. That was Boyan Petrov. To most, he was just a daredevil challenging the mountains, but his true passion was science. He was a professional zoologist at the National Museum of Natural History in Sofia. His office wasn't some dusty room full of books. It was the wild. He studied bats and cave fauna, and for a rare specimen, he was willing to crawl into the most inaccessible crevices on the planet. But in the early 2000s, fate dealt him a blow that would break even the toughest among us. The diagnosis felt like a death sentence: cancer. Boyan went through grueling treatment, rounds of chemo and radiation. His body endured the assault, the cancer retreated, but the victory came at a huge cost. The after effects of the treatment triggered an irreversible process in his body. His pancreas failed. The new diagnosis: type 1 diabetes. The doctors were unanimous. His athletic days were over. His future was a quiet routine, a strict diet, and avoiding any kind of physical strain. Any spike in his blood sugar could be fatal. But Petrov saw the situation differently. He decided the mountains would be his method of control. Instead of locking himself in his apartment, he turned mountaineering into a unique form of therapy. Now, every ascent became a complex mathematical equation. In his backpack, right next to his ice axe and ropes, was always an injection kit. Where a regular climber fights only hypoxia and cold, Boyan was fighting a second, invisible war, a war for balance within his own body. He'd give himself injections right there on the slope, in his tent, in the howling wind, calculating the dosage with the precision of a pharmacist. To him, it wasn't a disease. It was just a new set of rules for the game. He called it a lifestyle, where discipline saves your life, and the summit is just the reward for getting the math right. In the death zone, an oxygen mask is the only thread connecting a person to life. But for Boyan, it simply didn't exist. He chose a path many consider madness, and the climbing elite call pure style. No Sherpas hauling your gear, no artificial atmosphere from a canister. It's just you and the mountain, one-on-one. If you can't reach the summit with the oxygen that's already in the air, then you don't deserve to be there. It's a harsh, uncompromising philosophy. The 2009 season became his testing ground. The Karakoram, a formidable mountain range, greeted him with an icy wind. The goal, Gasherbrum 1, a reclusive giant over 8,000 meters high. Boyan pushed upward, listening to his body, every step a battle, but he managed it. The summit was his. It was his first 8,000er, and as he stood there, breathing the thin air, he proved that his method worked. The euphoria of success was more intoxicating than the lack of oxygen. But the mountains don't forgive overconfidence. That same season, he set his sights on the neighboring peak, Gasherbrum 2. It seemed like the system was dialed in. His body was acclimatized, and he had the strength. But danger wasn't lurking on a vertical wall, but on a seemingly gentle glacier. A snow bridge that looked solid instantly collapsed beneath his feet. The world turned upside down. Boyan was plummeting into an icy abyss. Falling into a crevasse is every climber's nightmare. You're trapped in a sack of ice, wedged between walls of ancient ice, where your screams are swallowed by the snow. Boyan was alive, but getting out of this trap on his own was impossible. Time was now working against him. The cold seeped under his clothes, and every movement threatened to send him sliding even deeper. Salvation arrived in the form of a Spanish climbing team. They happened to be nearby, and either heard or saw that something was wrong. A complex technical rescue began, pulling a man from the glacier's grip. Ropes went taut. The Spanish team worked in unison, literally snatching him from the ice. This incident could have broken anyone, made them hang up their crampons for good. But Petrov drew a paradoxical conclusion. Instead of fear, he found an even deeper conviction in the total self-reliance. He realized he couldn't count on a random Spanish team being there next time. He had to be so strong and prepared that he either wouldn't fall, or he could save himself. The incident only hardened his commitment to the pure style. And even in these critical moments, the scientist in him never switched off. While other climbers were taking photos of the panoramic views, Boyan was looking at his feet. At altitudes where all life seemingly dies, he found it. In his pack, next to the ice screws, were test tubes. He was collecting samples of soil, moss, and microscopic invertebrates at 6,000–7,000 meters. He was searching for the very limits of life, expanding our understanding of biology in a place where science usually gives way to survival. But the cruelest irony of all didn't find him in a frozen hellscape, but on the scorching asphalt of a highway. In 2013, the death zone came down from the heavens to earth, right into the Kresna Gorge. A normal road, a turn, and a sudden impact that split his life into before and after. This wasn't a heroic fall into a crevasse or a battle against a storm. It was just the raw screech of metal, shattered glass, and a silence that rings in your ears louder than any mountain wind. Boyan woke up in a world that had shrunk to the size of a hospital room. The diagnosis sounded like a verdict from a tribunal. Multiple injuries, his body literally mangled by the impact. But the epicenter of the pain was his leg, a complex fracture. The bones were so shattered, putting them back together seemed impossible. The surgeons did what they had to do. They turned his leg into a complex piece of engineering. They brought in the heavy artillery of orthopedic surgery, metal plates, pins, and long bolts to hold the fragments together. The doctors looked at the x-rays with professional satisfaction. But for the patient, they had bad news. They told him straight, high-altitude mountaineering was over. With a leg like that, just walking without a cane would be an achievement. The vertical world was closed to him. Recovery would take years, and the metal would be staying inside for a long time. The darkest period began. Months of slow, agonizing rehabilitation. The fitness he'd built over years of training melted away. His muscles weakened, his endurance dropped to zero. Boyan was learning to trust his own leg again. Every step a dull ache, a reminder of the foreign objects inside him. The 2014 season was approaching, and logic dictated he should skip it. Any reasonable person would have stayed home, had the metal removed a year later, gone through another round of rehab, and maybe, just maybe, tried again in 5 years. But Petrov operated on a level that the people in white coats just couldn't comprehend. He knew that time was running out. He made a decision that bordered on insanity. He was going to the Himalayas now. With the plates, with the bolts, with a leg that hadn't fully healed, this decision carried a hidden, monstrous threat. The physics of the situation were stacked against him. Metal is a highly effective conductor of heat and cold. Up there, where temperatures dropped to -40, those pins inside his leg would cool down instantly. They would become conduits of cold, straight to the bone, right into the core of his flesh. The risk of getting deep frostbite from the inside, without even noticing it on the surface, was colossal. His leg could simply freeze from within. He knew this risk. He could feel the metal under his skin with his fingers. But the desire to return was stronger than the fear. He packed his bag, checking his gear. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a cyborg, embarking on an experiment with his own body. He was betting everything on the belief that his will would prove stronger than the titanium screwed into his bones. Imagine a mountain that's the third highest in the world, but number one in its grim reputation among those who understand what high-class mountaineering truly is. Kangchenjunga, 8,586 meters of icy granite and snow. It looms over the Himalayas like a giant's throne. This is where he was headed, not to the tourist Everest, but here. A man who would set off a metal detector with a medical chart that declared him unfit for life in the death zone. The 2014 season began as a grand experiment in human physiology. Boyan approached the mountain with the caution of a surgeon. Every step was a test. He listened to the sensations in his leg. How were the titanium bolts behaving in the freezing cold? Was the bone freezing? But his body, against all predictions, worked like a Swiss watch. The metal, now a part of his skeleton, held up under the strain. He moved upward, leaving healthy, strong climbers behind him. On May 20th, he stood on the summit. All around him was the thin stratosphere, where the air held only a third of the oxygen he needed. In that moment, the history of high-altitude mountaineering was rewritten. Boyan Petrov became the first diabetic in the world to set foot on the summit of Kangchenjunga without an oxygen mask. He proved that the limits of what's possible exist only in medical textbooks, not on the slopes of the Himalayas. But the real nightmare began, not on the way up, but when gravity started pulling him back down. The descent is always the most dangerous part of the journey, and this is where Kangchenjunga presented its bill. His brain, tortured by hypoxia and colossal strain, began to fail. Reality began to fray at the edges. Boyan started seeing things that couldn't possibly be there. Strange lights flashed before his eyes. He thought he saw campfires burning on the snowy slope. He saw silhouettes of people waving at him, inviting him to leave the path. The hallucinations were so vivid you could almost touch them. It was his fuel-deprived brain trying to construct a new reality, filling the void with images. It's a death trap. One step towards these guests, and you're gone, into the abyss. He realized he was losing his mind, right there on the face of the mountain. He had to have a conversation with himself, forcefully ordering his own mind to ignore the visions. He forces himself to trust only his instruments and the route markers, not his own eyes. Every single meter of the descent is a battle for his sanity. He walks through ghosts, through dancing lights, until the air grows thicker. The visions recede. His metal-reinforced leg endures thousands of impacts against the hard-packed fern. He makes it down to camp alive, proving that even with iron inside, you can push the very limits of human potential. Kangchenjunga lets him go, but this success only whets his appetite. Now he knows his body is capable of more. The average human body needs a full year to recover from the death zone, but Boyan shatters that rule in just 2 months. He's barely off Kangchenjunga, and he doesn't head for a beach to calm his nerves or check into a clinic. He flies to Pakistan. Here, in the Karakoram mountain range, the rock is sharper, the ice is harder, and the weather changes with the speed of a bullet. This is the arena for those who find the Himalayas too forgiving. In his sights is Broad Peak, the 12th highest summit in the world. For most climbers, it's a lifetime goal, the peak of a career. Boyan storms it on July 23rd. He stands at 8,051 meters, the Karakoram wind whipping his face. It would seem the mission is complete. Any normal person at this point would be dreaming of a hot shower and the thick air of the plains. The descent to base camp usually means the end of the expedition, packing up the duffels and booking a flight home. But Petrov looks to the side. Right in front of him, taking up half the sky, stands a pyramid of perfect form. Chogori, K2, the Savage Mountain. The most dangerous, the most lethal, and the most coveted prize in the world of mountaineering. The statistics here work like a guillotine. For every 4 people who reach the summit, 1 dies. K2 doesn't forgive mistakes. It despises the weak. And Boyan, instead of leaving, makes a decision that sends a chill down the spine of anyone watching. He gives himself no rest. He uses his acclimatization from Broad Peak as a springboard for an immediate assault on K2. There's no time to think. He simply moves his camp to the foot of the giant. His body is running on fumes, on pure willpower. No recovery, no reset. It's a race against death, a gamble to squeeze through the weather window before the monsoons draw a curtain of snow across the mountain. On July 31st, just 8 days after Broad Peak, he enters K2's infamous bottleneck. It's a narrow ice couloir beneath a giant, overhanging serac, a block of ice the size of an apartment building that could collapse at any second. You can't stop here. You can't think. You just have to climb, straight up the vertical ice. Boyan gets through it, and then he's on the summit. 8,611 meters. The whole world is beneath his feet, and above his head, the blackness of space. Boyan Petrov becomes the first Bulgarian in history to summit K2. But the main record isn't about the national flag. He pulls off an incredible double. 2 8,000ers in 8 days. Only a handful of people in the world are capable of inflicting this kind of physical violence on themselves. He proves that the limits of endurance are far beyond what we believe them to be, and he descends a victor, etching his name among the elite of world mountaineering. But triumph on the summit of K2 is just a stay of execution for the sentence the body passes on itself. The descent becomes an agony where every step down requires more effort than 2 steps up. Boyan makes his way down, but inside his body, an invisible catastrophe is unfolding. His energy reserves are empty. 2 8,000ers in a week have burned his glycogen stores to absolute zero. His liver is empty, his muscles are running on credit, and his metabolism is in a freefall. He reaches base camp. It seems like here, among the tents and hot tea, he can finally breathe. The danger of falls and avalanches is behind him, but it's right here, in this zone of relative safety, that his most terrifying enemy catches up to him. Insulin. The very drug that saves his life every day now becomes a deadly poison. The balance is broken. He has insulin, but there's no sugar in his blood. His glucose levels plummet to critical lows. It happens in an instant. The world around Boyan begins to swim. His consciousness shrinks to a tiny point, and then it goes dark. This isn't fainting from exhaustion. This is a severe hypoglycemic crisis. The brain, deprived of fuel, simply shuts down its higher functions. He falls into a state bordering on a coma. The man who just conquered the most difficult mountain on the planet is lying on the rocks, unable to even call for help. His life no longer depends on the strength of a rope, but on the attentiveness of those around him. Fortunately, a group of Polish climbers are nearby. They see something is terribly wrong with Boyan. His gaze is vacant, his reactions are gone, his breathing is shallow. They act quickly without panic, professionally assessing the symptoms. The diagnosis is clear. His blood sugar has bottomed out. An emergency field resuscitation begins. The Poles pull out vials of concentrated glucose, pure fuel for the brain. A needle goes into a vein. Thick, sweet life flows directly into his bloodstream. The effect is astonishingly fast. Moments later, his eyelids flutter. Consciousness returns from the dark abyss. Boyan takes a deep breath. Color returns to his face. This episode at K2 Base Camp becomes a harsh lesson. It demonstrates that diabetes at extreme altitude is a ticking time bomb. You can be the strongest, most resilient, most technical climber, but biochemistry doesn't care about your willpower. The slightest miscalculation in nutrition, an extra hour of exertion, a mistake in dosage, and you're dead, even if there isn't a single crevasse in sight. Boyan survives, but the mountains make it clear. The next time could be the last. If he ever lets his tank run empty again. It seems that fate has a cruel sense of humor. The man who just survived K2 and descended from the death zone is nearly killed at a crosswalk in the center of Sofia. August 2016. A new expedition is just days away. The backpacks are almost packed, and at that moment, he's hit by a car. The scenario from 2013 repeats with frightening precision. Another impact, more asphalt, the wail of sirens. The doctors in the emergency room look at him like he's a madman. The diagnosis is grim: broken ribs, severe bruising, and trauma to that same metal leg. His chest is a mess. Every breath is a sharp stab of pain. Medical protocol demands immediate hospitalization, complete rest, and immobilization. Any sudden movement could shift the broken ribs and puncture a lung. But Boyan is looking at a calendar, not his x-rays. The season in the Himalayas won't wait. He signs a waiver refusing hospitalization. He literally escapes from the hospital, ignoring common sense and the pleas of his loved ones. His body is one giant bruise. His frame is cracked, but he gets on a plane. His target? Annapurna 1. This isn't just a mountain. It's statistically killer number 1. For a long time, for every person who summited and lived, another one died. Even completely healthy athletes are afraid to go there, but Petrov is going with broken ribs. The ascent becomes torture. At an altitude where the air is thin, breathing becomes rapid and deep. A climber breathes like a winded horse. Now, imagine that every one of those breaths drives a red-hot nail into your side. The broken ribs won't let his lungs fully expand. Boyan climbs on, gritting his teeth, pushing through the pain barrier with every vertical meter. The backpack presses on his injured back, the straps digging into the bruises. But he keeps moving. On April 30th, he sets out for the summit, and here, something incredible happens. Usually on mountains like this, the path is set by Sherpas, hardy local guides who break trail in the snow for their clients. But on the slopes of Annapurna, the commercial groups and their guides are slowing down. The deep snow is exhausting. People are running out of steam. Boyan, the man with broken ribs, overtakes them all. He moves to the front and takes on the hardest, most grueling work himself. He starts breaking trail, carving a path through the untouched snow for everyone else. He works like an icebreaker. Step, pack down the snow, pull up, breathe through the pain. He leaves healthy, well-equipped climbers in his wake who simply can't keep up with his pace. He's climbing solo, with no partner, no one to belay him. The summit of Annapurna greets him with an icy silence. He stands there at 8,091 meters, having proven once again that physical pain submits to the absolute dominance of the spirit. He descends a victor, leaving the doctors in Sofia to wonder what this man is actually made of. Every climber has a skeleton in their closet, and for Boyan, it's Gasherbrum II, the very mountain that, in 2009, threw him into an icy crevasse and nearly buried him alive. Most people would never return to the site of their potential death. But Petrov operates on a different logic. For him, leaving a route unfinished is an admission of defeat. In 2017, he returns to the Karakoram to settle that old score. He ascends the mountain with cold calculation. Now he knows every curve of the glacier, every whim of the weather. The climb goes perfectly, like something out of a textbook. He stands on the summit, looks down at the spot where he once dangled by a thread, and descends a winner. The chapter is closed. But this success is just a warm-up for the main event of the year. In the autumn, he shifts his focus to Dhaulagiri. The White Mountain is known for its treacherous nature and optical illusions. Its summit ridge is an endless knife's edge stretching into the sky. And here, a drama unfolds that isn't often discussed in commercial mountaineering. The thing is, Dhaulagiri has several peaks. There are false summits, which are relatively safe to reach, and there is one true summit, the path to which lies across a deadly traverse. Many commercial expeditions make it to the first, false point. The guides congratulate their clients, take beautiful photos with flags, turn the group around, and issue certificates of ascent. It's a convenient truth, a compromise with fear. But Boyan is a scientist. For him, factual accuracy is more important than safety. He despises the very idea of an almost summit. On September 29th, he begins his push. The wind on the ridge is so fierce it could toss a person aside like a feather. Boyan sees the tracks of groups that stop before him. He sees the exact spot where common sense screams to turn back. But he keeps going. He's walking a razor's edge of snow, where a single misstep to the left or right means a 2-kilometer plunge. He's searching for the highest point, that perfect geometric peak with nothing above it but the sky. He ignores the fatigue, ignores the example of others. He pushes through this terrifying traverse to the very end. And only when his altimeter and his own eyes confirm there's nowhere left to go does he stop. This is the true summit, the absolute honest peak. He captures this moment for history and for himself. A 10th star lights up on his record. 10 of the planet's 14 8,000ers are now under his belt. Only 4 steps remain to the crown of the Himalayas, and he's moving toward it with the relentless force of a locomotive. The spring of 2018 begins not with cautious plans, but with a declaration that sounds like a challenge to the very logic of high-altitude mountaineering. Boyan announces a project of breathtaking scale. Shishapangma, Everest, Cho Oyu, 3 8,000ers in a single season. This is a survival marathon where the finish line is in the stratosphere. Most climbers spend years preparing for just one of these mountains, and he plans to tackle them in a cascade, one after another, with no breaks. The first point on the map is Shishapangma. It's the lowest of the giants, only 8,027 meters, but it's in Tibet. The Chinese side of the Himalayas greets them not with the bright prayer flags and bustling tourist crowds of Nepal, but with a harsh, ringing emptiness. The bureaucratic rules here are strict, permits are expensive, and the logistics feel like a military operation. Base camp looks like a settlement on the moon. There's none of the usual hustle and bustle. On this entire massive mountain, there are only about 10 people. Imagine a giant, icy stadium with only 2 or 3 small teams playing on it. The silence here is so thick you can hear the snow settling on your tent. Officially, on paper, Boyan has a partner. It's the well-known Hungarian climber David Klein. But in the world of high mountains, the term partner is often just a line on a climbing permit. The only thing connecting them is that shared piece of paper, the permit that allows them to be on the mountain legally. In reality, they are 2 solo climbers sharing a base camp, but living by their own internal clocks. Klein is experienced, cautious, moving at a classic measured pace. Boyan, on the other hand, is a coiled spring. His acclimatization is going unnervingly well. While the other expedition members, and besides the Hungarian, there are also Italians, are just getting used to the thin air, suffering from headaches and shortness of breath, Petrov is already working the route. He makes his acclimatization rotations, climbing to the upper camps and descending back down, with an ease that stuns his colleagues. His body, hardened by diabetes and years of hypoxia, seems to operate in its own supercharged mode. He feels completely healthy, full of strength and determination. The mountain seems welcoming. The weather is giving them chances, and he uses every hour to prepare his body for the final push. For him, Shishapangma is just the first step on a grand staircase leading to Everest, and he's running up this step, completely unaware that the mountain is setting a trap. On April 29th, the camp wakes up not to an alarm clock, but to the premonition of a decisive battle. The group sets out on the route. Ahead lie the ice fields of Shishapangma, which seem to stretch on forever. Boyan, David Klein, and the Italian climbers move upward, bound by a single goal, but by different rhythms of breath. At first, everything goes according to plan, but the Himalayas can change the scenery in an instant. The sky, clear just an hour ago, begins to fill with a leaden gray. The wind picks up. It's not a storm yet, but it's the storm's icy breath. Gusts start to knock them off their feet. Tiny ice crystals whip their faces, and visibility drops. The mountain is giving an unmistakable warning. Get out. For an experienced climber, the howl of this wind is an alarm bell. David Klein and the Italians stop. They assess the risks. Their barometers and their intuition are screaming danger. To continue the ascent in these conditions is to take an unjustifiable risk. They make a difficult but rational decision. The group turns around. They begin their descent, choosing life and the safety of base camp. And in that moment, reality splits in two. Boyan Petrov stops, looks at his departing comrades, and then turns to face the summit. He sees the same weather, feels the same wind, but draws the opposite conclusion. In his mind, this isn't the end, but the beginning of a narrow weather window. He knows that in a couple of days, a real major cyclone is coming, one that will shut the mountain down completely. This is his only chance to slip through before all hell breaks loose. He's betting on his speed and his phenomenal endurance. He is left alone. The silhouettes of his partners dissolve into the white mist below, while he continues upward into a zone where the wind is only getting stronger. With every step, the distance between him and the world of the living grows. And this is where a factor comes into play that turns this solo ascent into a thriller. Boyan has no radio. This isn't a mistake or an oversight. It's his personal principle, a part of that pure style taken to its absolute extreme. He consciously refuses communication so that nothing can distract him from his dialogue with the mountain. No reports to base, no requests for weather forecasts, no voices on the air. He cuts the only thread connecting him to his team. Now, no one below knows where he is, how he's feeling, or what he's seeing. The radio silence becomes ominous. Boyan becomes a ghost on the slope. He is moving in a gray zone of uncertainty, relying only on himself. For the observers below, he has simply vanished from the information field. There is only the mountain, the strengthening wind, and a lone figure, stubbornly crawling toward the summit, straight into the path of the oncoming storm. He decides to take this chance, even if the price of failure is to remain on the mountain forever. Through the lens of a powerful telescope, a human life shrinks to the size of a trembling black dot on an endless white canvas. On May 3rd, a tense silence hangs over base camp. People are glued to their eyepieces. The distance is enormous. The air shimmers with heat haze, distorting the image, but a trained eye can make out movement. That dot is Boyan. He's alive, he's moving, and he's exactly where he should be according to his schedule, near Camp 3. Altimeters show an altitude of around 7,500 meters. This is the threshold, the point where the real death zone begins. Here, the body no longer recovers. It slowly dies with every breath. But the dot in the telescope stubbornly keeps crawling upward. The observers can see his rhythm, a step, a pause, a step. It's the signature of a man who knows what he's doing. It looks like he's just going about another day at the office, methodically gaining altitude before the final push. At this moment, there's still hope in the camp, that the lack of radio contact is just the quirk of a genius, not a distress signal. But the mountain decides the show is over. The weather changes not by the hour, but by the second. Clouds, dense and heavy like cotton, peel off the ridge. They roll down the slope, erasing the terrain. A white curtain closes over the view. First, the summit disappears, then the rock outcrops, and finally, that tiny black dot. The spectators below don't know it yet, but they have just seen Boyan Petrov for the last time. Visual contact is broken. The mountain has hidden him from the entire world. The agonizing wait begins. May 4th passes in complete information. Silence. The clouds hang like a thick curtain, hiding the drama unfolding up high. No one knows if he's still climbing, descending, or waiting out the weather in his tent. Each hour of uncertainty weighs on the psyche more heavily than the thin air. In the camp, they begin to realize no news is no longer good news. The radio silence and the lack of visual contact are turning into a sinister signal. On May 5th, the script changes. This is no longer an observation. It's a race. A Ukrainian climber and a group of experienced Sherpas begin the ascent to Camp 3. They follow tracks that are quickly being erased by the wind. Their task is not just to climb, but to find an answer. The ascent is tough. Fresh snow is knee-deep, and the wind tries to throw them from the slope. They push through the white haze, expecting to see Boyan's tent. In their minds, they picture the reunion. An exhausted but alive Petrov, maybe with a cup of tea, preparing for his descent. They reach the target altitude, their lungs burning from the effort, their eyes scanning for a bright patch of tent against the gray snow. They approach the spot where they last saw movement, an open zipper on a tent at 7,300 meters. That's practically a death note. The Ukrainian climbers and Sherpas who fought their way through the wind to Camp 3 expected to find a tightly sealed dome, a shelter where a man was waiting out the storm. But what they find is a scene that chills the blood faster than the frost itself. Boyan Petrov's tent is there, but it looks like a derelict ship in an ocean of snow. The snow has already done its work. It has half buried the structure, turning the bright fabric into an icy mound. But the most terrifying thing is the entrance. The flap isn't sealed. It's open or half open, and the wind is blowing freely inside, carrying in pounds of icy grit. For a professional of Boyan's caliber, leaving the entrance open in the death zone is something beyond comprehension. It's a violation of the most basic survival instinct. Any moisture inside kills the down in your gear, and without dry down, you're a dead man. The rescuers peer inside, hoping to see a person, maybe unconscious, maybe in need of help. But it's empty. Inside, there is only chaos. The sleeping bag, that last bastion of warmth, is packed with snow. It's cold and hard. This means its owner hasn't been here for a very, very long time. If he had just stepped out for a few minutes, the bag would have been rolled up or covered. Snow inside a sleeping bag. That's the seal of time. The group scans the perimeter, turning into forensic investigators at a crime scene where the evidence is being destroyed by a hurricane. There are no signs of a struggle, no tracks leading away from the tent. The wind here erases footprints in minutes. All we have are clues, circumstantial evidence. The open tent flap screams that something happened suddenly. The scenarios are terrifyingly simple. Either Boyan rushed out as he was, fleeing from something, or he stepped outside for just a moment and became disoriented. In a whiteout, with zero visibility, you only need to take 2 steps away from your tent for it to vanish forever. You turn around, and behind you, there's just a white wall. You search for the entrance, but you find only emptiness. The Sherpas understand. Looking for someone here, with the slope buried in fresh snow, is an impossible task. The tent is no longer a place of rescue, but a grim monument. On the 6th of May, the radio at base camp crackles to life with heavy news. Any hope that Boyan was simply waiting out the storm without a means of communication is shattered. His status officially changes. The words "missing" fly across global news feeds. This is no longer just a loss of contact. This is now a global emergency. Down in the camp and far away in Bulgaria, the scale of the tragedy begins to sink in. The man who always came back, who survived accidents and beat cancer, has dissolved into the thin air of Tibet. The mountain Shishapangma, the lowest of the 8,000ers, reveals its true brutal nature, swallowing one of the best climbers of our time without a trace. The disappearance of a person on an 8,000er usually means a quiet burial in the snow, but not this time. The news of the empty tent explodes across the media, and instead of quiet acceptance, a storm begins to brew. The epicenter is Sofia, where Boyan's wife Radoslava refuses to take silence for an answer. She doesn't put on mourning clothes. She puts on armor. She gets everyone moving, from journalists to government ministers. Under her pressure, the bureaucratic machine that usually takes months to warm up kicks into overdrive. Bulgaria understands. It's not just a climber dying on that slope, but a national hero, and to abandon him, there would be to betray themselves. And then, something happens that experts call a diplomatic miracle. Shishapangma is in Tibet, on Chinese territory. This is a restricted zone where foreign helicopters are forbidden on pain of being shot down. China's airspace is guarded more fiercely than a bank vault. Normally, clearing a flight takes weeks, but now, the clock is ticking in hours. 3 countries, Bulgaria, Nepal, and China, suddenly forget about politics, borders, and protocols. China makes an unprecedented move. It opens Tibetan airspace to foreign aircraft. The aces of high-altitude aviation step in, a Nepalese company called Simric Air. Their helicopters, machines capable of hovering where the air has no density, take off from Kathmandu. They cross the border, breaking through the invisible walls of geopolitics. It's a historic moment. Nepalese rotors slicing through Chinese air to find a Bulgarian scientist. The pilots are risking just as much as the climbers. They push their machines to their absolute limits, to altitudes where the engines start to choke from lack of oxygen, scanning the slopes for any contrasting speck of color. But the helicopters can only see the surface. To find a man, you need to feel the snow with your hands. A ground-based special forces team is formed. These aren't commercial guides who hold tourists' hands. This is an elite unit of Sherpas and Chinese rescuers, people with lungs of steel and the endurance of marathon runners. They are given a task that would make a normal person's legs buckle, to ascend into the death zone at speed. Their goal is to comb every meter of the route above Camp 3, to peer into every crevasse, to check every suspicious snowdrift all the way to the summit. They carry oxygen cylinders, not for themselves, but for Boyan. Their backpacks are filled with advanced medical kits and evacuation gear. The whole world is watching this race against time. 3 nations are pooling their resources, money, and technology for one life. It seems like such a powerful armada simply cannot lose. The rescuers push upward, battling hurricane-force winds, driven by a single thought. Boyan Petrov, the man who conquered cancer and diabetes, couldn't have just disappeared. He must be waiting for them somewhere, in an icy trap, and they have to reach him before his internal clock stops for good. The rescue mission turns into the highest altitude detective case in history. The elite team of Sherpas, risking their own lives, climbs above 7,500 meters. They literally comb the slope, looking over every icy ridge, scanning the terrain all the way to the pre-summit ridge. Their eyes search for the bright color of a climber's suit against the endless white, but Shishapangma remains silent. There is no body, not on the route, not below the cliffs, not in any visible crevasses. It's as if Boyan Petrov simply vanished into thin air. However, the mountain does offer the rescuers some silent clues scattered around Camp 3. These findings raise more questions than answers. They discover personal items on the snow, a t-shirt he was likely drying or changing, and energy gels, fuel for the summit push that was never used. These items are lying as if their owner just stepped out for a minute and forgot to put them away. But the most poignant discovery isn't equipment. The rescuers find his expedition journal, a small notebook where Boyan, with scientific precision, recorded his thoughts and observations right up to the very end. It's the expedition's black box, so to speak. The last entries are abrupt, leaving us alone with the mystery of his thoughts before he stepped out into the unknown. Among his belongings, they also find a critical medical supply, insulin, and this discovery splits the expert community into two camps. Some argue it was a spare kit that Boyan prudently left at the camp for emergencies, having taken his main supply with him toward the summit. Others see it as a fatal sign. Perhaps in a state of hypoxia or confusion, he left his life-sustaining medicine in the tent, dooming himself to die within hours. The vials lie in the snow, offering no answer as to whether this was a calculated move or a tragic mistake. The absence of a body leads to three main theories, each one chillingly plausible. The first, a hidden crevasse. The glaciers of Shishapangma are treacherous, capable of hiding bottomless pits under a thin layer of snow. A person can fall into such a trap in an instant, and the snow bridge would immediately close over their head, erasing any trace forever. The second theory, a fall. One wrong step on the hard-packed snow, a loss of balance, and the body would plummet into inaccessible couloirs, unreachable even by helicopter. The third theory, disorientation in a storm. A sudden whiteout, when the sky merges with the ground, can rob a person of all sense of direction. Boyan could have simply wandered off the route, lost the tent, and frozen to death somewhere on the vast slopes, buried by snow in a matter of hours. The rescuers realize they've done the impossible by climbing so high, but the mountain was smarter. The artifacts are collected, the journal is packed away, but the central mystery remains unsolved. On the 16th of May, 2018, the thrum of helicopter blades over Tibet finally falls silent. A ringing silence descends upon the search operation headquarters, a silence heavier than any roar. This is the moment of truth, when hope gives way to harsh reality. The operation coordinator and Boyan's wife, Radoslava, make the most difficult decision of their lives. They give the order to stop the search. The decision isn't driven by a lack of faith, but by the harsh calculus of survival. The rescuers, having worked in the death zone for days, are on the verge of physical collapse. To continue combing a slope where every step is an incredible effort would mean putting the lives of the elite Sherpas and pilots at mortal risk. The mountain has made its point. It has taken one. But if they don't stop now, it will take the rest. The risk becomes unjustifiable. The rescue teams begin their descent, leaving the summit in peace. Boyan Petrov remains on the slopes of Shishapangma. Tibet, that harsh and mystical land, becomes his final resting place. The ice and snow he so loved and studied his whole life now cover him forever. He becomes a part of the landscape he conquered, merging with the eternity of the northern Himalayas. But the physical disappearance of a person is only the beginning of their new life in history. In the offices of the National Museum of Natural History in Sofia, the work doesn't stop for a moment. Boyan's colleagues sort through his field journals and the specimens he collected on previous expeditions. And here, a true scientific miracle occurs. New species of animals, previously unknown to science, are described. Their Latin names are forever etched with the name of their discoverer, Petrovi. This name is now carried by tiny inhabitants of caves and highlands. Boyan lives on in biological taxonomy, inscribed into the very book of nature that he read better than anyone else. His voice is heard again, but now from the pages of his books. The manuscript he was working on until his final days becomes a bestseller, The First Seven. It's not just an expedition report or a dry chronicle of ascents. It's a testament, a manifesto of the power of the human spirit. The book becomes a guide for thousands of people battling serious illnesses. It teaches that a disease is not a dead end, but simply a new set of conditions for a problem that must be solved. And then, the film I Am Here Again is released. The title feels prophetic. The documentary captures this incredible story. From the fight for life in a hospital bed to the assault on celestial peaks and the unprecedented rescue operation, audiences see a man who shattered stereotypes, rewrote medical protocols, and showed that the limits of what is possible exist only in our minds. Boyan Petrov walked into the mountains, but he returned to us all as a symbol of an absolute, unbreakable will to live.